Welcome everyone to this Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia partner briefing. My name is Shantha Rajaratnam and I am Professor and the head of the School of Psychological Sciences at Monash University. And I'm one of the co-leads of Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia together with Margo Lydon, and you'll be hearing from Margo in just a moment as well. So I want to begin by firstly acknowledging that we're meeting on the lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation here in Naarm in Melbourne. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise that Indigenous peoples have been meeting on these lands, caring for communities, for land and waterways for millennia. And we pay our respects to them, and also anyone who is watching this video in the future, the lands on which they are joining from as well, and First Nations people that may be joining today or in the future as well. So just as a reminder, today's briefing is being filmed, and so we're going to use this to be able to brief partners in the future as well. I want to acknowledge the presence of Deputy Premier the Honourable Ben Carroll as well, and also the Executive Dean of the Faculty of Medicine, Nursing and Health Sciences at Monash University, Professor Christina Mitchell, Chief Commissioner of the Victorian Health Commission, Treasure Jennings as well, and all of you who are gathering from a variety of different organisations here in Victoria and around the country. Welcome. So, workplace mental health and safety and well-being is a complex challenge, and a complex challenge of this scale that's affecting 14.6 million working Australians in every workplace requires a sophisticated approach. And this kind of approach really needs to bring together the whole ecosystem in workplace mental health together. We need to interact with government, we need to interact with industry, with peak bodies, and a diverse workforce. We need to bring unions, service providers, regulators, technologists, together with academic experts to play a critical role as stakeholders in this ecosystem. I'm proud that universities can play an important role in this process because universities play an important convening role in bringing stakeholders together. They can bring a diverse group together to solve complex problems. And there are numerous examples of such academic, industry, government collaborations that have delivered significant impact for the Australian population. In fact, despite their differences, we find that most stakeholders that come together in this context across a complex workplace ecosystem are aligned with a shared common vision, and that is to foster a safe, engaged and well workforce contributing to businesses' performance, safety and productivity. Yet the reality is that many workplaces and industry and their workforce are experiencing significant challenges in pursuing this vision. We want to flip these challenges into opportunities. Workplace mental health and safety is really ripe for innovation, for systems change interventions and scale that should be driven by prevention-led knowledge translation research. So Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia, which is led by Monash University, with a network of partners from across the ecosystem, some of which are represented in the room here today, is poised to really lean into this opportunity. The entity will be grounded in cutting-edge research. It's going to draw this research from numerous disciplines from large institutions all over the country. It's going to be focused on delivering outcomes and impact, and it's going to focus on collaboration for innovation and impact. Now, we know a few words about research. We know that research across the translation pathway will underpin solutions to complex problems, including complex workplace problems. We know that industry and government are looking to academic experts to ensure that investment is grounded in evidence. That research needs to be robust and rigorous, and it needs to also have a view to training the next generation of researchers and practitioners who can work in industry, in government, and also can co-design the solutions of the future, as well as the research that will deliver meaningful impact. I'd like to now introduce you to my co-lead, Margo Lydon, who's going to, I've been sharing this leadership journey with Margo, and it has been an absolute, Margo is an absolute powerhouse, I describe her as, because we have achieved so much in the time we have been working together. And I'd like Margo to give you an update on the key achievements, particularly in the last quarter, and where MHWA is headed.
Hello everybody, and thank you very, very much for your time this afternoon. Let's just go through. And I would like to also acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands in which we're hosting this afternoon. It is always such a privilege to be in this beautiful country of ours, and they've taken such good care of it. Shantha, thank you so much for that introduction. I am particularly excited because I get to do two very, very cool things this afternoon. Firstly, to share with you an update of the tremendous progress we are making together towards establishing Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia. And then secondly, in a few minutes, to introduce a very dear friend and colleague, Mary Ann Baynton, our keynote speaker. But I would like to begin by, I guess, providing some context. We know there are some people in our room today, but also others who will be viewing this video online in the future who may not be fully aware of what is and who is and how is Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia. So let me share with you just a little bit of context to start with. MHWA, as it is known for short, is not just another program. It is a bold response to systemic need. We are bringing together the best of science, lived experience and practice. As the National Centre for Workplace Mental Health and Wellbeing, MHWA will champion innovation, spearhead research and provide practical implementation support to help create mentally healthy workplaces that are safe and productive. This is about a coordinated nationwide transformation. In fact, this is not only going to be impacting Australian workers and workplaces, but we do see that the opportunity is to also share the learnings and the journey together in tackling some of these big challenges and sharing that with our friends globally. So MHWA is a world first. It is the first national centre dedicated to workplace mental health, safety and wellbeing. It is being established and actively supported by diverse partners, as Shantha has spoken about, representing the full ecosystem of workplaces and workplace mental health, safety and wellbeing. And they're really collaboratively focused on coming together to help us create the solutions and the innovation backed by science and evidence that will make the difference. MHWA is poised to tackle, I think, some of the really big, challenging, hard issues that is facing our workers and workplaces in the country. What surprises me is the extent to which some of the challenges that we hear about in industry are actually some of the challenges that other industries, both here in Australia but also globally, face. So the opportunity for us to recognise that some of these opportunities and challenges are broader or bigger than any one jurisdiction, any one government, any one organisation to solve to on their own, I think is a tremendous opportunity that we see is going to add value to MHWA and its partners. So what will we actually do? Working with our partners, we have co-designed these three integrated work streams. They are intentionally broad and they really are there to give us guidance around the types and the natures of projects that we will do together. So at the very core of MHWA, it is all about innovation through projects and delivering those. The three areas are very, very broad, as I've said, around leadership and skills, and I think it's fair to acknowledge that leaders and leadership competence and capability has never been under more pressure than it is today. So a real need for how do we scale innovations that help leaders be better leaders. The second is around work and workplace systems design, and that includes the built environment, the actual physical environment in which workers go to work, as much as the systems of work. And then the third area is in our work streams is in the worker and work group health. And this is where that team level or work group level intervention, I think, is an opportunity for us to demonstrate impact. MHWA will absolutely take a systems level approach to bring about the change we want to see, and that's going to be very important in driving the innovations and the projects that we do together. To bring this to life and to share an example, I think Shantha and I have had the privilege of talking to hundreds of individuals and organisations in this journey, and everywhere we go people have got ideas of projects of work that we could do, and that's been really fantastic for us to gather those ideas up. So one of those ideas is absolutely to lean into one of the known risks, psychosocial risks around occupational violence. This is around the abuse, the verbal and physical abuse that impacts many, many workers and organisations across our country. It impacts small, medium and large organisations that are based in metropolitan cities all the way through to remote and rural and regional Australian places of work. It impacts on leaders, it impacts on workers, it impacts on work teams, and it absolutely cuts across many different industries. So we've got retail, we've got healthcare, we've got the public service, we've got transport and logistics, we've got call centres, we've got financial services, we've got disability care, we've got all sorts of different sectors who are working and in putting themselves in the line of duty every single day and are being impacted by occupational violence. So how about we come together? How about we learn what's working in perhaps retail and see how might we actually apply this across different sectors and systems? And this is the opportunity with MHWA, is for us to be able to really bring together that ecosystem, amplify what is already working well and innovate that to scale that across or up into other industries and businesses, but also to fill the gaps in the areas perhaps that we need to have better solutions. And I think that is one of the real opportunities that our partners see, is this bringing together of everybody, contributing their strengths, their know-how, their expertise, and really uncovering those gaps for innovation. So one of the other elements is around most definitely the key outcomes. We are going to be embedding into every program or project the need for the projects to advance these three key outcomes. We see these as, and have heard very much and clearly from our partners, these are some of the game changers we need to see to bring about the impact. The first is this route to market and implementation support. This is very much about how do we help get great evidence-based programs, initiatives, tools into the hands of business and make that an easier process. And likewise, from an industry or business procurement perspective, how do we absolutely help industry know what to procure, what is going to actually help them, and support them to embed that into their business. So it becomes BAU, doesn't sit off to the side. It's not just the HR's responsibility or work health and safety responsibility. It becomes the way of doing business. The second is around economic and social evaluation and impact, and really allowing us to bring together these scientific disciplines and really help business understand the impact of the work that we are doing together. And the third is most definitely the nod to where our worlds are at, and that is in the digital space, looking at the digital and data governance, looking at data sovereignty and data security, but also giving guidance to employers and workplaces about the safe use of technologies and what's fair and reasonable for workers as well as their workforce. Very excitingly, I am absolutely able to share with you some of the key outcomes that we are achieving through MHWA. So the next little bit I'm talking to is going to be our really about our partner update. I think it's fair to say we're making some really exciting progress, and MHWA is working really hard. As many of you know, we want to hit the ground running. It's really important for us. So tonight or today, I'm really happy to share that we're kicking off, very early days, but we're kicking off our first flagship project. So I'll certainly be able to share with you more details into the future, but our first flagship project is one where our establishment partners are coming together and really looking at having a project that will impact every worker and workplace in the country. Is the long game to this project, so very much at that national level. The project aims to deliver national impact for all workplaces in really helping them to identify solutions that will help to mitigate or eliminate the most high risk psychosocial risks. So really looking at the psychosocial legislation and the risks associated with that, and how do we help businesses mitigate and prevent harm, which is very, very exciting. We will be also launching other flagship projects in the coming months, so I'll keep you posted. We'll keep you posted on what they will be. The next is around our National Workplace Initiative. So some people are aware that over the last number of years, there's been the development of the NWI, as it's affectionately referred to, the National Workplace Initiative. This was a piece of work that was led by the National Mental Health Commission and very actively supported by the members of the Mentally Healthy Workplace Alliance. Now, within the Department of Health, they have released a process to find a future homeowner of that NWI. And so under the leadership of Monash University and with 14 other subcontracting organisations, many of whom are our establishment partners, we've come together and we've put a submission forward into the Department of Health. And I'm really excited to say that we're through the first stage, yay. We are waiting to hear about the second stage, which is most likely to be a tender. But in terms of the value for MHWA, I think if we are successful in winning this, it will provide us with a very, very solid platform of credible information, resources and tools around creating mentally healthy workplaces on which we will be able to springboard the work that we do and the innovation together. This afternoon, I'm also really pleased to share with you that we have 3 new establishment partners joining MHWA. So in our last update, we shared with you that our family of partners, establishment partners, is growing, which is tremendous. But this afternoon, it's really terrific to let you know that Black Dog Institute, EML and CIRA, representing the New South Wales Government, have joined us as establishment partners, and we are so excited to have them all on board. We're not going to stop here, I will say. We do and want additional establishment partners to help us work towards establishing MHWA, but it's just tremendous to see such incredibly strong leading organisations take a leadership role nationally and really bring to the fore the opportunity as we see forward. I'd like to acknowledge David from CIRA in the room. Thank you for coming from Sydney for this afternoon. Thank you so much. And I was chatting to Sam Harvey, who's the Chief Scientist and Professor at Black Dog Institute only last week, and he sends his apologies, as does EML. But it's tremendous to see so many establishment partners. We have also been asking our establishment partners to roll up their sleeves and help us as we are really in the co-design of really how about we will go forward in getting MHWA prepared for launch and establishment. So one of the areas that we've been doing some work with, and this is with Monash University, guiding the process of our governance and what are the governance arrangements for MHWA as we go forward. We will also be having and continuing to have conversations with our friends around the states and picking up conversations now that the Commonwealth has landed the government back into place. We'll be picking up those conversations with our friends in Canberra. So today we are certainly inviting any organisation, whether you're listening to this at a future date or here in the room, if you are interested in joining these national organisations as leading the way, we would absolutely welcome a conversation with you. So where to from here? Certainly we absolutely are preparing for an imminent, hopefully very imminent establishment and launch of MHWA. We have one eye firmly on our future, but we know that we need to crawl before we walk, before we run. But without a doubt, we know that the work that we've been doing over many years in workplace mental health, psychological safety, health and safety, wellbeing in the workplace, these are all leading the way globally. And so it is really terrific for us to be able to think about the role MHWA can play into the future with our friends from around the world. We see a great opportunity to engage in this global dialogue and many of the MHWA partners and our in-principle partners are already global organisations. So they are keen for us to not only really lean into Australia and see how we are working here to improve the experience for workers and workplaces, but also share the gold and the magic as we create it. It is an absolute pleasure for me now to introduce a wonderful friend and a true expert, Mary Ann Baynton. Mary Ann and I have known each other for way too many years, a long time. This is her 5th trip to Australia, so I think she's part Aussie, and it's absolutely wonderful. Mary Ann is a force for good in this world of psychological safety within workplaces. She has absolutely played an influential role with the Canadian national standards and has been advising and working with governments, unions, industry and workers for many, many years. She's also been called the godmother of psychological health and safety, and for good reason. She served as the co-chair of the Technical Committee for the National Standard of Canada on Psychological Health and Safety in the Workplace, and was a member of the Mental Health Commissions of Canada's Workforce Advisory Committee and a member of the Employment Standard Committee for the Alcohol and Other Drug Association. She's also an author. I don't think she sleeps, but she's also an author of several books in the field of workplace mental health, including The Evolution of Workplace Mental Health in Canada, Towards a Standard for Psychological Health and Safety. Mary Ann is also proudly serves as the Director of Strategies and Collaboration for Canada's Life's Workplace Strategies for Mental Health. This is a tremendous program of work which provides free, practical ideas, tools and resources to help with the prevention, intervention and management of workplace mental health issues. These tools are freely available across Canada. One of her incredible talents, and I think it's her best, she's got many, is to simplify the complex. So if you've got a notepad or paper ready out, trust me, you'll have lots of gold of practical experiences and advice and wisdom that Mary Ann will share. So please make Mary Ann welcome.
Okay, the real reason they call me the godmother is because I've been doing this since prehistoric times. That's the truth. The land that I come from, the land that I work on, was governed since the 1600s by a wampum treaty, which is called the dish with one spoon. The dish symbolizes the world, the earth, the land, and the spoon symbolizes all of us. And we're all dipping from the same dish, from the same bowl. And that is very symbolic for me about the interplay between Australia and Canada, especially in this field. Today I'm here as a guest of Flourish DX, and we're here to speak to people across the country about what we know, but importantly for me, I'm here to learn as well from the people in Australia. It's funny, when we started with the standard, so this is 2009, we started to work in this area. And in 2011-12, we were creating the standard. It was released in 2013. We were inspired by what Australia was doing. And we read a lot of what was being done here and then created the standard. And after that, then through Margo and others, I came back here to share what we were doing, and so it goes on and on. What the Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia is doing is inspiring to me, and I will be bringing that back, because rather than, we do a lot of this work ad hoc, right? We have an issue, we get together, stakeholders, people that are interested in that, we talk about it and we try to come up with a solution. And to have something like this, where you have all the right people at the table all the time, is amazing, really amazing. And I know our government, when they hear about this, are going to jump on it. So thank you for that. But I was asked to give you a little bit more of the history. And so what I want to share with you is some of the things that I think will probably be relevant to you. When we created the standard, we use a balanced matrix. And what that means is that we make sure that no one group can monopolize or dominate the conversation. So we have employee representatives, we have organizational representatives, we had representatives from government, from research, from clinicians. And that in and of itself was so fascinating, because we were all so passionate, right? We all wanted this thing, but none of us agreed on what this thing was. We all had our own ideas. And Senator Michael Kirby, who was the one who really got the government involved as a funder and as a support, he said, you know you're successful when you have equalized unhappiness. Nobody's won what they wanted originally, but everybody feels like we have something that everyone can buy into. Beforehand, we actually delayed the development of the standard for about 3 months, because we couldn't recruit union representatives who would sit on the committee. And we said, why would we even start this without them being present? Because if we don't have their voice at the table, then it's going to be an uphill battle later to be able to get buy-in. And so we said, no, we need that. We're now updating that standard, and the diversity of voice at the table is so significant that the discussions are really rich. So rich that some of the original people said, I'm out. Like, we've already talked about this, we already made a decision, and it should be the way that we originally decided. It's like, no, we have to, have that time. We need to listen, we need to do it. And what this group of people has come up with, I think, has significantly improved our original work. And that's really what we're looking for. One of the other things that has been remarkable is that almost every organization that has been involved in the beginning of this has come away with some benefit for their organization. That we all win when we put together, and this is a volunteer process. Nobody gets paid to be on these technical committees. And yet, I think that we would all agree that the benefit was significant. So with what you're doing now, you're able to tackle some of the more challenging problems. What we have done quite well is we have got the low-hanging fruit. We've got the simpler approaches. And some of the things that I talk about is just having employers do nothing else in the beginning if they're not ready, but ask the question, how will this, meaning this decision, this plan, this change, this legislation, this new equipment, this approach to recruiting, this team meeting, how will this possibly impact the psychological health and safety of our employees? A simple question can start to shift their mindset to just thinking about the fact that everything we do will impact psychological health and safety in one of 3 ways. It will either help enhance it, it may be neutral, or it could have a negative impact. And just having that moment to think about what that is and be able to look at it will be really helpful for employers. We talk about readiness. Are they really ready for a system? Are they really ready to even survey? There's a phrase that we use, which is don't rush to survey. And the reason we say that is because if you go ahead and have an employer do a survey and really for the first time understand what their employee experience is, they're often paralyzed because it's like, I had no idea. Most employers are not evil people who are trying to harm their employees, but many employers are not aware of the negative impact. And so when we finally tell them and they don't know what to do about it and they do nothing, that can actually increase cynicism. It can actually increase employees saying, you asked my opinion, I told it to you and now you're doing nothing. So we want to get employers prepared. We want to help them to understand that they need to have a plan in place to take action immediately after doing that survey. And it doesn't matter whether the action is actually related to the results. What matters is that they're seen to be doing something to improve psychological health and safety. So there's lots of different things that they can do that are low cost or no cost, that really are just, we care about you, we want to hear you, we want to react to you, we've heard some things, and you can have this plan in place before you ever put the survey out. And this way, then you have time to analyze, you have time to look at what your results are and make a plan for continual improvement. The other thing that we learned the hard way, because that's how we like to learn everything, is that we really need to understand the emotional cost of leadership, that it's not an easy thing to do, and that sometimes the risk to psychological health and safety is greatest for our leaders. We put people between a rock and a hard place. We say, you know, you're going to get promoted because you are technically very good at the job. But we're not going to give you any of the resources, tools, training, or support to be able to handle the various demands of your employees who are emotionally distressed. We just expect you to figure it out and do it. And it's not fair. So if we want to move forward with psychological health and safety, let's start with helping our leaders to be able to be self-aware, be emotionally intelligent themselves, be able to take care of themselves, and then ask them to be able to take care of our employees and to do what they need to do. So I'm going to stop there. I know I was supposed to talk for longer, but I said it's going to be so much more fun to talk to Liam and Margo than it is for me just to lecture you. So we're going to start our panel, and I really encourage you to think of the questions that you have. The godmother thing, I've been at this a long time. I promise there won't be any forsets in your beds if you talk to me. And if you're not old enough to get that reference, ask somebody who's older. But yes, so let's come up and we'll do this. Thank you.
Come on up. I'll introduce Liam O'Brien, who's going to help us with the panel discussion this afternoon. So for those of you who don't know Liam, Liam is the Assistant Secretary at the ACTU, and he is going to facilitate our discussion this afternoon. The ACTU has come on board very early and has been an active establishment partner for MHWA. We're incredibly grateful for the work that Liam and his colleagues do, but particularly for supporting MHWA. So I'll hand over to Liam in just a moment. We are going to have some scripted questions first and then open the floor for questions. So please raise your hand, as we would like like very much for you to speak into a microphone. We are filming, as you know, the speakers this afternoon, so it would be great if we're able to capture your voice and question for the video for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Margo. Before we kick off, I'd also like to acknowledge country, pay my respects to elders past and present, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Mary Ann, I'm going to start with you, partly because you're mic'd up and I need to hand over to Margo in a moment to give the microphone. But I thought it was really interesting to hear how you talked about what inspired you and indeed your colleagues in Canada around pursuing a national standard. Because actually, my strongest recollection when I started the ACTU was Canada that we looked towards when it came to developing our own national standard, a compulsory standard, a standard that's required in terms of psychological health. But what was it that specifically motivated? What are the key things that you saw happening in Canada that started to change the conversation? I might go to Margo after that to think about what lessons are we learning from Canada to make sure that we continue that evolution.
So for me, my work started in mental health, specifically helping leaders who had employees with mental illness to support them at work. And I started to see this pattern where organizations, and I didn't have the language for it, where people cared about each other, where they spoke openly, those ones, it was really easy to do the return to work or accommodation. And then there were other organizations where, how could you tell somebody with depression or anxiety from every other employee? Because everybody was upset and stressed out and overwhelmed. I now know that there's a psychologically healthy and safe workplace versus non. That's what it is. So that was my first motivation is, why don't we go upstream instead of waiting till somebody's sick and unable to cope? In fact, many of the people that I worked with that had a mental illness, so whether it was addiction, eating disorder, depression, anxiety, bipolar, said work was a refuge. It was a place where the repetitive negative thoughts of depression or the repetitive fearful thoughts of anxiety were quieted down while they focused on doing something they knew how to do, and the distractions were removed for them. So it was like, well, if work is a refuge for some people and it's not sustainable for others, what could we do differently? So that was the original motivation for me.
And I guess from my experience in 15 or thereabouts years in this area is looking to Canada, it was just such an inspiration to see a large, diverse country really tackling something at a national level, be it voluntary, but absolutely recognising that employers were really wanting guidance and wanting evidence as to what worked and how to go about this. And I remember one of Mary Ann's first trips where the standard had been released and she was telling the story of, we've released the standard and it's very dry. And then we released the assembling the pieces, which she described as, we needed to put people back together again after they had read the standard. And I always remember thinking about Australia's approach needing to not only provide, very much the technical and what do we need to do and do well, and what are the standards, what are the expectations, but we need the how. We really need to help explain, share, demonstrate, role model, the how do we actually do this. And I think this is where we're at in our journey now, is we've got a lot of research and evidence. We've got some case stories that work really well, but we need a nationally coordinated approach and innovation to really amplify that.
So picking this up a little bit, obviously in 12 years a lot has changed in terms of the world of work. Today we're talking about AI, talking about things like remote work, things that I imagine back in 2013 were not really top of mind. What do you see as the big trends that are really, I suppose, things we should be using as a way to sort of advance change when it comes to mental health in the workplace?
So I think the thing that we've learned, apart from the issue about leadership, we really have become aware that we need to support leaders and not just find them at fault. But that we need to simplify it. It was the most, as we're talking as a committee, The most important thing is don't make it too difficult. Make it easy. Help employers understand you're not supposed to assess all this and then fix it all, because that's not possible. That you're to assess it, then you prioritize what you think is most important. You celebrate your wins, which is also really important. When we did the case study after the standard was released, with 43 organizations, we realized that all of the organizations, now these were self-selected people who cared already, but all of the organizations were doing 70% of the standard anyways, because that's what good leadership is. That's what good practice is. Psychological health and safety shouldn't be another burden to add to employers who are already burdened. It should be a way to tweak what you're already doing. Tweak your orientation process. Tweak the way you do performance management. Tweak the way that you do team meetings. Tweak the way that you do promotions. Tweak the way you do terminations. That's what psychological health and safety has to be. So what we're trying to do with this new edition of the standard is make it easier for the average employer to understand and to use.
I think some of the trends we're seeing that are really influencing how we're shaping MHWA is we've got 5 generations in the workforce with varying different expectations. We've got AI, technology, data. We've got very little by way of genuine practical guardrails and guidance for employers in this space. And yet we've got, we're on the cusp of some incredible tools that are going to transform every job in some way, shape or form. I think the other thing that I would say that we really hear is the need for us to get prevention-led, and that is a tremendous opportunity. We've got a lot of services, healthcare services and other services really are supporting people when the wheels fall off and things become really challenging, whether that be a workplace related issue or not. But we can do so much more in a much more cost effective way if we're coordinated and prevention led. And I think certainly in our conversations, one of the pet peeves I have is, seeing wasted resources and duplication. And I think that is something that MHWA will be able to achieve.
So I suppose in my first movement away from the script, which was always going to happen, I suppose, one of the things that we talk a lot about in the trade union is how work is changing. A generation ago, our parents were working in manual physical jobs. The common injury was musculoskeletal. But actually, we've had this whole area of work that has been largely unregulated, and standards go a long way, whether it's in Canada or in Australia, to sort of fixing this. And the future of work is jobs which are more likely to be cognitive, more likely to be non-routine. How important is it that we start to get in front of that and sort of change the way we think about health and safety? Health and safety is typically seen as something that's blue collar, and something that's going to hurt you at the workplace, to starting to appreciate that actually there's this great framework out there that identifies risks, controls hazards, does it in consultation with workers, that standards provide this huge opportunity to do. Are we seeing that happening in Canada? Or are we seeing that sort of maturity move from one which is sort of responding to mental health issues in the workplace to sort of moving upstream to protecting workers in that sense?
Absolutely. It's interesting, Liam, because I really think about you can't go onto a construction site without a hard hat and steel toe boots. And yet we expose workers to psychological trauma and injury without any protection. And I believe one day that's just going to be criminal. And the thing is maybe 20, 30 years ago, we didn't know how. It's like, hey, you're a firefighter, suck it up. That's the way it is. This is the job, take it or leave it. But we now know so much more about trauma. The fact that it is the thoughts in our mind in the moment of trauma that can make or break the way we respond long term. We know that. So why don't we teach people to be aware of and to manage and challenge those thoughts that happen in that instant? We can do this. And I think we're understanding it more and more, and we call it preventing psychological injury. But we think that it should become a responsibility. We can do better, and waiting till after the fact, the recovery from PTSD is slow and difficult, we can do much better if we prevent.
I certainly agree, 100%. And I think this is a tremendous opportunity for MHWA and its partners and in the innovation space is how do we learn from people who have experienced workplace injury and harm with a prevention lens, just as one of the ways to think about doing things differently. And for me, I think people with lived and living experience, people who have been injured at work, whether they've gone on to make a claim or not, have insights into what could have actually made a real difference in that moment or moments that has led to their injury and harm. So I'm very excited by this whole notion of bringing, voices, diverse voices and experiences to the table to help inform the innovation, the research, the evidence, the science, and then the implementation of that in a co-designed, co-created and co-implemented way that genuinely has the voice of people that this is impacting.
Absolutely. I think picking this theme up a little bit further and switching, you talk about the analogy of sort of a hard hat on construction sites, because I think we'd all say, let's make sure we don't have anything that sort of hits you in the first instance.
Yeah.
And getting employers or workplaces to work, I suppose, what we might describe as sort of further up the hierarchy. Let's prevent the exposure in the first place. There are a lot of challenges with that mental health. I can't see, the unguarded equipment that's going to take off my arm the same way I can in relation with, as opposed to, say, in relation to mental health, which are sort of often social interactions. How do we get employers to think further up the chain? How do we get them to think not just about prevention, but actually about systems of work, how we design jobs that are not going to have workers exposed? Is that too much to ask at this stage? Is it something that's happening in Canada and indeed, Margo, in Australia?
My colleague Peter Kelly would say, prosecute them.
Absolutely.
That's how you do it. But I think most employers would love to understand how they could prevent it, because for them, financially, reputationally, it's better for them. I don't think there's employers out there who say, we really don't care. It's that we really don't know how to do it. And so by helping bring this forward to say, we know way more now about how to prevent the worst effects of psychological harm. Millie, I don't know what Millie's last name is, Jason, was telling me about a study in New Zealand where they looked at firefighters with PTSD, and overwhelmingly the trauma happened after they got back to the station by the way people treated them about their response. And interestingly enough, when I was working with the Department of National Defence in Canada, the soldiers said the same thing. When we're in the theater of war, we're okay, we're doing our job, but then we come home and people say, well, why did you do that? Why didn't you do this? And that's where the inability to function starts. And so if we know these things now, because of the research, we can do better. It's going to be organizations like Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia that bring together the people and make that practical. Because if I just say that to an employer, they're like, well, that's good, but how do I actually execute that? How do I actually make that happen? And this is what you can do.
And I think in conversations we've had over the last few days is how do we actually make this accessible for business? And one of the things we've spent a lot of time talking about is you almost don't mention psychosocial risk or psychological health and safety, but you embed it into what problems are they experiencing and how might we go about solving to those problems, knowing that we're actually embedding in prevention-led harm minimisation, mitigation strategies, but you don't necessarily need to use that language. And I think you've got some, had some amazing examples of that in your career where you've gone into businesses and industry to really shift, what you know to be some issues happening within that industry, but you've, embedded it, you've snuck it in.
You speak their language, right? You start where they're at. And one of the examples that I shared this morning is two organizations going through a merger. You want them to now launch a psychological health and safety system. They're overwhelmed. They're really focused on doing this and doing it well. I would say to them, I can help you to improve your employees for both organizations' ability to manage change. We can help teach them how to manage change and be more resilient through it. I know that's psychological health and safety, but I'm not talking that. I can also go in and help you. You're going to have teams that are going to be made up of people from both organizations. There's going to be, some attrition people that are being let go. We can go and help bring those teams together, help to build them up so they're ready to work together faster. We know that's psychological health and safety, but we're not using that language. We're helping you with your merger. And this is true across the board. Whether you want to improve sales, whether you want to improve productivity or performance, whatever you want to do, psychological health and safety can help. It's just that when we say psychological health and safety to most employers, their eyes glaze over, and it's just overwhelming.
The systems level approaches, because I think this is often something that we all encounter, which is that we can get organisations that are very committed to workplace mental health. We can get them to implement, ad hoc changes, and I think you said this in your speech earlier. How do you get system level change? What are the most successful strategies to really getting organisations, but indeed, in many cases, whole industries, which is what we really need to see happening in terms of changing systems?
Yeah. So some of that is simply to look at the policies and processes from that perspective. How does that impact the psychological health and safety of the workers, and then make those changes? But I think one of the things, well, it's not that we disagree on much, but one of the things that Margo and I strongly agree on is that the biggest impact on employee experience comes at the teams level, not the organizational policy level, not even necessarily at the leader level, but at that experience. I had a leader who, when they were assessed, there was a real problem with civility and respect on their team, and they were horrified because they were one of the most respectful, kind, caring leaders that I've ever met. But if your employees aren't treating each other with respect, then it's a problem. So if you can do an organization-wide initiative across sectors that impacts the team dynamics, that's what I think is most successful. We can have all the policies we want, but if they're not going to have an impact on the employee's experience at work, then they're just a bunch of words. We need to impact that experience.
I would agree, and I'd build on that by saying I think we've lost, or we've not lost, but we've not valued some of the foundational level skills in what it takes to be a good leader, such as good listening skills, empathy, compassion, and some of those areas. And I think with MHWA, how do we scale that is going to be the big challenge. Like, how do we absolutely build some great leadership tools and systems and processes and trainings and the offerings that might sit within that space, and then scale it. So it can be scaled across industry, scaled across a large organisation, scaled across multiple industries, whereby we've got great listening, empathy, capability, compassion, confidence, and some of the really foundational skills that we don't necessarily spend a lot of time in developing and cultivating. So leaders can listen to understand, not listen to speak. It's those basic fundamentals I'm keen for us to uncover and get good at.
I just want to add, in Canada, one of the principles of the standard is that it applies to everyone. It applies to the employees. They have a responsibility to do no harm to each other. In the same way, the unions have a responsibility to do no harm in their interactions in the workplace. And that's another thing that you can scale, is we need to give employees enough knowledge so they understand the impact that they're going to have on others, so they can resolve conflict without it becoming a personal attack, so they can bring up concerns in a way that is helpful and not harmful. that when we're approaching a bully, we're not bullying the bully, but we're actually intervening in a way that respects somebody might be going through something, but we can still stop the behavior. So that is something that it doesn't matter what sector you're in. There's a certain level of knowledge we should be giving to employees because they're not getting it in school.
This is a good one. I want to build on this because I think if we sort of describe it, the solution's not just making employers more benevolent, kinder to employees, or indeed making regulators more diligent, although to your point, a few prosecutions around psychological health and safety wouldn't go astray, but actually recognising that employees, workers, have a right to healthy work and a right to psychologically healthy work. How important is it to be able to bridge that knowledge gap, but also to get workers to see it as a right? Because these are the things that make change more enduring. And I'm curious about your own experience. You reflected at the start that unions weren't necessarily the first adopters. What's been the experience since in terms of ensuring that it continues on?
So firstly, I'm going to say they have a right and they have a responsibility. Workers do. The unions were worried that what we were trying to do was take away the privacy and confidentiality of individual employees' mental health information. That's why they were resistant. We had to convince them that that's not what psychological health and safety is. It's not about individuals. It's about the organization doing no harm writ large. And so to get employees to understand that they have a right to go to work, do a good job, that's their responsibility, is to do the work, but without harm, and be able to go home at the end of their shift without feeling that they've been harmed by the work environment. That right and that responsibility go hand in hand. But I said to a group of union reps, I really can see one day that as the unions become champions for psychological health and safety, that they become the partner with the employer in identifying the hazards, in mitigating the risks, and coming up with ideas. I said, I could see a day where a big employer would say, you know what we need to help us with this? We need a union. It doesn't happen very often right now. But if it became really that way, that we're working together, then yes, the union may have a difference of opinion about certain benefits, but if both the union and management share the desire to protect the psychological health and safety of employees, there's a real synergy there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to add to that, I think unlike any other physical hazard, consultation, cooperation, coordination is essential when it comes to psych. You can't see the systems of work that harm employees. And so that level of engagement is really quite critical. In fact, it's a non-starter when it comes to mental health. I suppose one final question, and then I want to open it up to the floor, so quickly think about your questions, is really, we talked about two contexts, Australia and Canada. I'm keen, given how widely you travel, you're off to New Zealand next week. They are doing some interesting things when it comes to work health and safety that I wouldn't necessarily say we should emulate. But what are the best practices? We talk a lot about Australia and Canada leading the world in relation to workplace mental health, but I think you and I were talking about some really interesting parts of the world where mental health is really a number one priority.
Well, I will say the best practice in a way that many people can hear it is the best practice for psychological health and safety is ask your friggin' employees. That's the best practice because that's the only way that you can know. When you're at a certain level of maturity, the surveys and the data collection and all of that is important. But to interpret the information that you have, the only way you can do it is to talk to the employees and to say, what does this mean to you? Because often people will want to create a policy, a program, an approach to deal with what they see as the issue, and it doesn't work because it's not what the employees need for that particular group, that particular team. It's not the way to approach it. So I would say all around the world, that's the best practice. Ask the people that are impacted by it, what would make it better? Because if you have their buy-in, of course it's going to be more effective because it's what they want, right? It's what they're willing to do. But let me just add one thing, because always the issue is, but what if they ask for the sun and the moon and the stars, right? Like it's unreasonable. We can't give them everything they want. My approach is, before you say yes or no to what they ask them why that. How will that help you do your job? How will that help you here at work? Not how will that help give you a better life or the job of your dreams, but how will that help you? Because if you understand the underlying need, you may not be able to give them what they ask for, but you can solve that problem.
And I'm going to take it up a notch to a systems level best practice. And I think this speaks to our first of our key outcomes, that implementation support, is that we can have the best practices and policies and standards or laws or whatever it might be, but unless we are helping to be part of the positive change we want to see and employees feel and hear and experience every day in the workplace, and helping employers to actually bring about that change, I think best practice will only take us so far. So I'm really excited by the opportunity for MHWA to really support, in varying different ways, really support that implementation, to embed these innovations, these programs of work, these products and services and solutions that we'll co-design together to implement them into business. So it's part of BAU, and the business then gets the economic and social outcomes and impacts that we want to see.
It's a really good point to now open it up to the floor. So I'm going to ask people to raise their hands. We're going to get a microphone over to you shortly, but just as one final plug on that, I think we would say from the trade union movement, we have done a lot of work in terms of plugging the legislative gaps, ensuring that work, health and safety doesn't just deal with the physical hazards at work, but also the psychological hazards. But it's now about building capacity in workplaces to implement those changes. So, next question. Oh.
Like I'm number one. I'm Treasure, and I'm the Chair Commissioner of Mental Health and Wellbeing Commission. And I've been following you guys for a long time, as you know. But I've got a question more for you, Margo, about your aspiration, I suppose, for the MHWA. I keep wanting to say MHWC because that's me, so MHWA. And I think it's at that very structural level, and some of the I think the impacts that we see, some of the worst impacts that we see are perhaps, this is PS, this is not Dorothy Dixer from Liam, probably we see them in some of our biggest employers in Australia, particularly around casualised workforce, that kind of workforce instability. And it has, I know it, I see it all the time, and government also do this too, I hate to say it, but we when we're trying to have as many people in make our workforces as inclusive as possible, so that we have a lot of diversity in our workforce, which means that we have neurodiversity in our workforce, but we also have a lot of instability, particularly as we're adopting AI and all those types of really rapid changes in the makeup of our workforce. Do you think there's an opportunity for MHWA to really be influencing that in that space as well?
I certainly think our role is to shed a light on the impact on the individual and the work group, as well as the organisation. And that impact is not only potentially the negative and the harm, but also the opportunity. So the analogy that's going through my mind is COVID and flexible work. And you've got people who are saying back to the office 5 days a week, and you've got other organisations saying, no, you can work completely remotely from home. And yet the evidence, and every bit of evidence I've ever seen, is ask your employees, as Mary Ann says, and somewhere in the middle is probably what's going to be the best for the vast majority, and you will always need to make accommodations for individuals. So really leaning in, I think that there is programs and innovation and research and work that we need to do as MHWA to look at what is going to be the shifting dynamics in workplaces, AI-driven, technology-driven, or other drivers such as casualisation, and how might we actually solve to this that improves the productivity and the economic benefits, but the social benefits as well. And striking that right balance is not easy, but I think we've got super smart people in this country to lean in and help us solve to these things. Thanks, Treasure.
Let's go back to Christine.
Thanks so much. This is a really exciting discussion. I've really enjoyed it. My question is a good segue to what you said about increasingly people are working from home. I'm interested in what impact on mental health is working from home having on the individual, and also having on teams, where some employees decide they want to work completely from home in a team where some come to work. What impact is that having on the mental health of the workforce?
Well, I would have to say it depends on the person. For some people, and what we found is especially people with physical disabilities, working from home was significantly better for their mental health than going through what it took to get to work and to be in an environment that really wasn't conducive to support their work. For other people, it creates a sense of isolation and loneliness and distraction because there's so much else going on in the house. So this is why it's really important not to have a one-size-fits-all approach, but to really say, you know, somebody says, I want to work from home all the time, I would say, how will that help you? How will that help you do your job? And if they say, you know, it's just the commute. Okay, well, what if in order to do the team building, you only do the commute 1 day a week or 2 days a week? So we can find solutions that work for everybody if we understand what the need is. If they say, you know, I don't want to work from home at all while everybody else is working 2 days, I might find out that home is a chaotic, unsafe place for them. And so I don't want to say, well, everybody's going to work from home 2 days a week. So we really need to listen. Yeah.
Ditto what she said.
Yeah, but on an organisational level, that is challenging when you've got 3,000 staff and you've got to request each of them individually how you want to work. So I'm interested, and I agree with you, we need to talk to our staff. But some organisations have set rules. You can work 2 days from home and come to work the rest of the time. Do you think that's a good model?
In Canada, they have brought it down to the leader level.
Yeah.
So the managers to speak to the team. Most of them have landed on, we need to come together. So there is 1 or 2 or 3 days a week that everybody must come in. We must share the days, and you can't ask people to come in to sit and stare at a screen. If you're having them come in, then have them come in for some meaningful interaction. So that seems to be, but every organization's different, and they're all going to land on what they want. But we call it cascade. In psychological health and safety, everything can't be top down. Everything can't be bottom up.
Yeah.
It must be cascaded down, and the organization says, this is what we're looking for. Leaders, you decide how you're going to do it, and then do it with your team.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Hi, Peter Bragg. Thanks for your talks. Really great and very instructive. I want to talk about pushback. So I'm a review scientist. I did some work for an organisation several years ago about the damaging impact of generational stereotyping. So I'm sure everyone's heard Gen Z are self-centred, they're soft. I wonder, in recent years, have you started to experience or observe pushback against being accommodating to psychological safety and wellbeing, and how do you deal with that?
So there's a phrase that I only heard very recently called the weaponization of psychological health and safety. And I had to find out what it was, because I didn't experience it myself, so I had to find out. And so what some of the leaders are saying is, well, you know, now they're saying, oh, you can't do that because it's harmful to my psychological health and safety. And when I dug a little further, what I understood, it was often that the leaders themselves felt intimidated by this pushback. I said, if somebody says to me, this isn't good for my psychological health and safety, I'd say, come and sit down, tell me more. How does this interfere with you being able to do your job, with you being able to feel safe to do your job? And to really listen and go to that place where I will address the underlying need, but it's not, you're not weaponizing it. people whine because they feel they're not heard, right? If I think you're not listening to me, then I'm just going to get more emotional and I'm going to get louder.
Oh, God.
So the weaponization is often when a leader doesn't know how to respond to someone who's emotionally distressed. And most leaders were never trained to do that. If we're expecting them to do it, we need to provide them with that. But it's not anything to be afraid of. If somebody says that, let's find out. What are you talking about? And if you're talking about me giving you feedback or me giving you instructions, then you tell me, how do you want me to give you feedback? How do you want to get your instructions? Because my job is to provide that.
It's a really good point. It's a great question because I think this is one of the things that we see a lot, particularly at the moment in terms of generational change in terms of expectations in workplaces. We spend a lot of time destigmatising mental health. We spend a lot of time getting people to talk more freely about the impacts of work on their mental health. When we start to weaponise it as a generational thing, we start to force those things back under the covers, not to be talked about. So actually, I think we should be embracing discussions around this because in the same way, I can point to a million sort of health and safety hazards that our forefathers didn't think was a particular risk to their health. Evidence showed quite the contrary, asbestos, dust, all sorts of things that we now welcome employees calling this sort of stuff out. And I think this is something that we should be really alert to in terms of something to push back on. All right, I think we had a question down the front here. I'm going to make Michelle move. I'm going to swap.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. Great discussion. Thanks, Mary Ann. Thanks, Margo. Moira Junga from the Sleep Health Foundation, long-standing psychologist. And one of the things we haven't spoken about yet today is, in my practice as a psychologist, 90% of what we talk about occurs outside of the therapy, like the extra therapeutic factors outside of the consulting room. And I'm wondering about your godmotherly advice and your approach to the strategy within workplaces, because so much of it actually occurs outside of the workplace as well, and what they're doing all night on their screens or just family domestic violence. Just your approach to the strategy for this with those extra therapeutic outside of the workplace factors. Thank you.
When we talk about psychological health and safety, we're very clear that we're talking about what is within the influence, control, and responsibility of the employer. The employer has no responsibility to become a psychologist, to become a mental health therapist, and in fact, it's not ethical because they're in a power relationship, and if they start to tell people what to do about their health issues, about their finances, about their relationships, being in that power relation means that there's strings attached and that people will feel compelled. So we tell employers, listen to what people have to say. But when it's something that is not work related, say that there's better people to help you with that. Let me connect you with those resources. And in the meantime, how can I help you while you're here at work and dealing with all of that? How can I help you be successful at work during that time?
I suppose even on the higher level of just the policy level of just teasing it out, not knowing what's what, knowing cause and effect. I guess it's a bigger picture, isn't it? I don't expect to have the answers. I just know you would have a lot of experience with just where the boundaries are, and I guess mitigating it with certain policies. I guess.
Yeah, it's that people with respiratory problems are going to have more severe reactions to certain chemicals at work. But we don't assess your respiratory health before we eliminate a hazard. And it's the same with psychological health and safety. We need to remove the hazards in the workplace for everyone. It's going to be particularly helpful for the people who are struggling with things that are outside of the control of the employer. But we remove them for everybody, and it reduces the stigma for the people who also have a mental illness because it's done for everyone. But no, so I'm just thinking, am I on the right track with what you're talking about? I don't want employers to become armchair therapists. I do want them to be able to make it safe for people to say, I'm going through a really nasty divorce. I just lost my parent. I did this. And listen compassionately, but say, can I connect you with someone who can help with that?
I think, again, we tend to separate things on a sort of, we do certain things for physical health, we don't do them for mental health. If we accepted that an employee came to work and had maybe played footy on the weekend and strained something, we'd make reasonable accommodations in terms of how we organise work to accommodate that. We should expect, in fact, almost guarantee that what happens outside the workplace is going to impact employee mental health. We should design systems of work that both encourage employees to talk about that so that we're not putting them potentially at risk, but also design systems that will reasonably protect all workers, whether they are having those sorts of moments or whether they are, not. I think we're probably now running out of time, but Nari has put her hand up. I'm going to let her answer a quick question and maybe 30 seconds each on this.
Thank you, Liam. This is a question for both Mary Ann and Margo, actually, and it's theoretically based but has practical implications. So the MHWA, 30 seconds. The MHWA talks about psychosocial safety and psychological safety as part of that, with the importance of organisation, team and individual levels. Mary Ann, you talked before around prioritising what's most important and talked about the leader as being linchpin in that equation, and leadership skills, emotional intelligence and so on. If you were to, people say people leave organisations, they don't leave organisations, they leave their line manager or their leader. So in the context of that, but also in the context of research pointing towards the organisational level factors that Liam's just talked about being super important as opposed to focusing on an individual's resilience per se, do you see the leader or line manager equation and the importance of that as now requiring perhaps more emphasis than the organisation and or individual level, and if so, why?
No.
Thank you.
Organization is responsible for a system of support and management and monitoring of what leaders do. So it's always all, not one or the other. It's always got to be all. So the organization has to have a system whereby they recruit, train, and support leaders, and they must actually have a way to measure the impact that it has on employees. So all of it.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think the one-to-many relationships that leaders have is absolutely part of the organisational culture, part of the organisation. But that relationship is based on the systems and structures and processes within the organisation. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Margo. Thank you, Mary Ann. I think I'm going to hand over now to Shantha to take us away.
Thank you, Mary Ann and Margo, for this really rich discussion where we're learning so much about creating mentally healthy workplaces in Australia as well as globally. It's now a great privilege for me to introduce the Honourable Ben Carroll MP, Victoria's Deputy Premier, and the Minister for Education and the Minister for WorkSafe Victoria and the Transport Accident Commission. Thank you, Deputy Premier, for being available to join us this afternoon for the Victorian Government's support for Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia. Thank you.
Thanks, Shantha. And it really is a privilege to be here and to be able to sit through that. I felt quite fortunate that my diary got rearranged this morning and I could say I wanted to come for the whole session. But that was to really listen to you, Mary Ann, and the expertise you've been able to bring here, but also to have the audience here. Christina Mitchell, thank you. To Treasure Jennings, who from the questions, Liam, good friend of mine at the ACTU, got Ash West here, the CEO of WorkSafe. What is occurring and the work of Margo, Shantha, I think is really awe-inspiring. As you said, Margo, Mary Ann's topic will give us lots of gold nuggets. And I was taking lots of notes throughout it. As the Deputy Premier and Minister for Education, and as someone who deals with, a range of workplaces, staff, and is such a big employer of the public sector, it's so important that we continue to really take a leaf out of Margo's book, listen to understand, and to really make sure we're doing everything we can at system line leisure, at system wide reform, and talking to our teams and leading from the front. And as a government that did a Royal Commission into mental health, it's imperative that Royal Commission and its reforms get implemented. And although I haven't been in the chair long as the Minister for WorkSafe, something I am proud about was that just through the Cabinet recently, we got our psychosocial hazard legislation through, and that'll go through the Parliament, and I think make a really important change. I think, though, to hear you talk about, Mary Ann, about the tweaking, I think when you're looking at such a big reform, it is important to also, as you said, celebrate the wins. And I think getting that through the Cabinet recently, for those of you who don't know, we were the first state to announce that we were to do the psychosocial hazards and do legislation. We're the last to actually get it into the Parliament. So that was something we should celebrate as a government, and something that a lot of my predecessors had a role in doing as well. But to also see, Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia, and the announcement earlier today, and to have representatives here from New South Wales, Sarah, thank you for being here, EML and Black Dog signing up, just goes to show that this really is moving in a really important direction across our nation. And I know our Victorian government does want to be an exemplar in some of these big challenges that are facing us. And often we do think about working from home. And you might be aware, it was almost the number one issue in a recent federal election, working from home. And it is about talking to your employees. What is the right mix for them? Is it, 3 or 2 or 1? Is it other issues at home? Is it the transport system? Do they have access to public transport? All of these things we know will lead to a healthy workplace. And I was thinking also, Liam, through that, it's almost like we need to bring the accord back, isn't it, when it comes to having mental health workplaces where it isn't an obligation, or it shouldn't be seen as a cost, but really an investment for the employee and the employer coming together. So I think the work that Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia is doing is critical. And to be part of a government that's made an investment to support you, I'm really proud of it. And I think the work of Monash, nation-leading reform in this space, is so important. And something I've seen firsthand as the Minister for WorkSafe just is, it is a reality that well and truly mental health injuries are far and above physical injuries, are taking longer to help solve. And myself, in terms of challenging workplaces, as I'm also the Minister for Education, I was out of the school this morning that have had to deal with the grief of losing one of their students. And the way the school community has come together, the way organisations like Origin, Headspace, a principal that's well versed in psychological help and support, it was quite awe-inspiring to see when systems come together and workplaces come together, what we can achieve together. But I think there's so much that the Canadian example, the Australian example, continue to build those bridges. And it's a credit to you all for the real world impact that you're having. I think I leave this forum with something that was really said at the end, really ask your employees. That's really the best place to begin on solving some of these big public policy challenges we have around mental health workplaces. But also too, as you also said, Margo, about having that prevention lens as well. What can we do before we have the issue arise? So it's been a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure as a politician to do less talking and more listening. So congratulations to all involved. This is a really important step forward, and everyone involved should be very proud of the work they've done. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Deputy Premier. It's a real pleasure to have you join us today. for the Victorian Government's active support for Mentally Healthy Workplaces Australia through WorkSafe Victoria. So we're very, very pleased. As we wrap up this afternoon, I want to thank you all for joining us. Thank you for your support for MHWA and invite you to consider how you want to continue to engage with us in the future, either as an in-principle partner, or you may wish to join us now as an establishment partner as MHWA really becomes a reality. Help us to really shape the future of creating mentally healthy workplaces here in Australia and globally, shaping the establishment of these flagship projects that Margo mentioned. So I want to thank Liam, Margo and Mary Ann. Mary Ann, you amaze us that, I mean, I'm a little jet lagged at the moment, but you look bright as ever, considering both of us were sitting on the flight from Perth last night. Thank you to Flourish DX as well for bringing you here. It's a real privilege to have you join us for this partner briefing event. So please feel free to reach out to us. The contact information for Margo and myself is listed there. Thank you all for your support and look forward to continuing to work with all of you. Thank you.